Hello everyone. So we will start with the second class on the video lectures of excretory system. In previous lecture we had covered clinical manifestations or syndromes of renal diseases. We had also talked in very brief about various congenital anomalies and hereditary nephritis. In this lecture we will start with acquired diseases of kidney and mainly we will talk about glomerular pathologies. So there are a large number of diseases which can involve the glomerulus primarily. Glomerulonephritis is the term used for diseases which involve the glomerulus predominantly. As we will see that in various types of renal diseases, all the components of kidney they can be involved. So in glomerulonephritis, although glomerulus is the predominant site of affliction, but the tubules, the interstitium, the vessels, they can also be affected to some degree. But glomerulonephritis is the term used for diseases where the disease will start or it will involve the glomerulus predominantly. So further, these glomerulonephritis they can be divided into primary or secondary. If the primary site of involvement is glomerulus, then primary glomerulonephritis, or if it is a part of a systemic disease, then it becomes secondary glomerulonephritis. Similarly, depending upon the duration of disease, these can be divided into acute or chronic glomerulonephritis. First, we will discuss about the pathogenesis of glomerular injury, how glomeruli they are injured in different kind of inflammations or other diseases. Then we'll talk about the various morphological features or histologic alterations that we see in or in different glomerular injuries. Then we'll talk about clinical manifestations of glomerular injury. This we have almost covered in our first lecture, so we will not talk about this in detail. Just a brief reference to clinical manifestations of glomerular injuries. Then we will talk about the classification of different type of glomerulonephritis. And finally, we will talk about different individual glomerulonephritis. So we'll start with pathogenesis of glomerular injury. Much is not known about the initial triggering event or etiologic agent that leads to most of the glomerulonephritis. What exactly leads to injury is not known, but what is the mechanism of injury that is known, and it is mainly immune mediated injury. So this immune mediated injury, various mechanisms of this immune mediated injury they have been identified. So these are broadly divided into, one is antibody mediated glomerular injury, then cell mediated glomerular injury, then secondary pathogenic mechanisms like cells and chemical mediators, and finally there can be non-immunologic mechanisms. Starting with antibody mediated glomerular injury. So as you will see that antibody mediated glomerular injury, it can be of three types. First is antibodies which are generated against glomerular antigens, that is they are directed against the antigens which are a part of glomerulus. Then secondarily they can be generated against antigens which are planted on them, that is they are not of glomerular origin but they somehow come to lie in the glomerulus, and against them antibodies are generated. And secondly, the antigen antibody complexes or immune complexes they form in the circulation, and these complexes, these preformed complexes, they go and then they settle down in glomerulus causing injury. So first we will talk about the antibodies which react against in situ glomerular antigens or the antigens of glomerular origin. This pathologic basis of glomerular injury, this was identified by two experimental models. First one is anti-GBM disease and second one is uh, anti-GBM disease is also called as Masugi nephritis, and second one is Hayman nephritis. So let's first talk about Hayman nephritis. This was just like Masugi nephritis. It was identified in rats experimentally. What they did in this experiment was that they immunized the rats with preparations of PCT brush border, and this induced lesions in the form of a membranous nephropathy in rats. Now, on immunofluorescence, when they saw, they identified granular deposits on the glomerular basement membrane, and it was because of immune complex deposition. So the antigen which against which these antibodies they were formed, it has been identified in rats, and it is known as migalin. However, the similar corresponding antigen in humans, it has not been identified, although similar type of membranous glomerulonephritis has been observed in humans. We will discuss this in coming lectures, but for now, just the basis of this antibody mediated glomerulonephritis. So this was one mechanism. Second experiment was Masugi nephritis. So this was identified when the rats they were injected with anti-rat kidney antibodies. These anti-rat kidney antibodies, how they were generated? They were generated by injecting rabbits with rat kidney concentrates. So rat kidney concentrate was injected in rabbits, so it was foreign to them, so they generated antibodies. Now these antibodies were again injected into rats, and when they were injected into rats, they developed a different kind of glomerulonephritis that was different than membranous glomerulonephritis. What they developed was that they developed a diffuse linear pattern of staining along the length of glomerular basement membrane. So this was also identified in other organs like lungs, and the human counterpart of this Masugi type of nephritis is Goodpasture syndrome. So in Goodpasture syndrome in humans, there is a simultaneous lung and renal lesions, they are there, and the antigen identified in humans is NC1 domain of alpha 3 chain of type 4 collagen. So this type of disease, here the antigen is identified, whereas in Hayman type of nephritis, the main antigen against which antibodies were generated is not identified. However, this gave us some kind of feedback as to why what are these different mechanisms by which glomerular injury can occur. So this has been seen in a subset of patients where antibodies they can form against self antigens, and those self antigens they again are of glomerular origin. But what leads to uh, initiation of this type of immune response against self antigen, about this not much has been known. So we just discussed one mechanism of antibodies reacting, where antibodies were uh, directed against glomerular antigens. Now, second mechanism of glomerular injury due to antibodies is antibodies reacting against planted antigens. So these planted antigens, they are not a normal component of glomerulus, but these are planted or deposited there. Unlike the other mechanism which we just discussed, where the antigens, they were of glomerular origin. So what are these antigens? These are usually some cationic molecules like DNA, nucleosomes, bacterial products, drugs, viruses, which bind to anionic glomerular basement membrane. So they have some kind of affinity, some kind of structural prototype is there, where they have more tendency to go and settle down in glomerular basement membrane. So they go and they settle down there, and then against these foreign antigens, not foreign but not of glomerular origin, they can be foreign also, but at times they can be of human origin, but the main thing is that they are not of glomerular origin. So they go and they settle down because of their some structural peculiarities. They go and settle down in glomeruli, and against them now antibodies they are formed, and these immune complexes then cause glomerular injury. Now again, because this is immune complex mediated injury, so pattern of immunofluorescence would be of granular type. Then the third type of antibody mediated injury is because of circulating antigen antibody complexes, or simply immune complexes, depositing in glomerulus. So this is caused by trapping of immune complexes in glomeruli, which are pre-formed in circulation. So they have already formed in circulation, and these antibodies they have no glomerular specificity, It's just that they localize in glomeruli because of their certain physicochemical properties and hemodynamic forces. They just happen to be trapped in the glomeruli, the complexes they have already formed. And because now they are trapped in glomeruli, they cause injury at the site of their trapping, which is the glomerulus. So these are three different mechanisms of antibody mediated glomerular injury. One is where antibodies they are directed against glomerular in situ antigens. Second is where they are reacting against planted antigens, and third is where antigen antibody immune complexes they have already formed in circulation, but they happen to be trapped in glomeruli where they cause injury. So this diagram depicts the various mechanisms of antibody mediated injury. On the left we have circulating immune complex deposition, where the immune complexes have already formed in circulation and they have simply come and become trapped in glomeruli. These are depicted here by the antigens by a circle or a sphere and the antibodies by their typical form of a Y-shaped structure. So these will lead to granular appearance on immunofluorescence. Then the B and C diagram, they are of two types of antibody mediated injury, which was because of in situ or the antigens of glomerular origin. Left side is anti-GBM antibody mediated, which is also experimentally called as Masugi nephritis. Here you can see that the antibodies they are lying along the length of glomerular basement membrane. The antibodies they are coming and the different antigens they are identifying these antigens on glomerular basement membrane, and against those glomerular basement membrane antigens they are reacting, and therefore the appearance on immunofluorescence it will be of linear type. Then C diagram, it is because of antibody against glomerular antigen which will not be of anti-GBM type. So here they are identifying some kind of glomerular antigen but which is not of GBM type. So against those antigens, these antibodies they are coming and they react with them, and because of these immune complexes, again the appearance will be of granular type. These photomicrographs they are of immunofluorescence. So on left side we have this granular appearance and on right side we have linear type of immunofluorescence that we have been talking about repeatedly. So granular deposits they will be seen in antibody mediated injury of hematonephritis type or membranous type. Then they can also be seen in planted antigens and they will also be observed in circulating immune complexes which have come and have become trapped in glomeruli. And this B type of linear deposits they will be seen in only anti-GBM type of antibody mediated injury or whose experimental counterpart was Masugi nephritis, and in humans we can have Goodpasture syndrome where antibodies against the various antigens of glomerular basement membrane, especially of lungs and of kidney, they are generated. So these are the two morphological patterns of antibody mediated injury. So this pattern can, if you have identified it on immunofluorescence, it can give you some insight about the mechanism of injury of glomerulonephritis in a given case. So we just discussed that these immune complexes they can deposit in glomeruli. Now there are different sites of deposition of these immune complexes in glomeruli, and they are of some importance because they again help you in identifying different types of glomerulonephritis. Also, we'll be talking about these deposits or sites that certain kinds of deposits there will be subendothelial in location or subepithelial. So first we need to know where, when we say subepithelial or subendothelial, where exactly is it located. So the deposits can be either exclusively mesangial deposits, or they can be subendothelial deposits, or they can be subepithelial deposits, or they can be a combination of these, any of these three. So what are these exclusive mesangial deposits? As you would recall that mesangial cells, they are the supporting cells. They give support to these loops of capillaries of glomerulus. So these deposits, they will be around the mesangial cells. Then subendothelial deposits. Subendothelial cells, meaning they are beneath the endothelial cells. And endothelial cells, where will we find them? They are lining the capillaries, and on the other side of capillary endothelial cells there will be glomerular basement membrane. So these subendothelial deposits, they will be between the endothelial cells and glomerular basement membrane. So they will be internal to or lower to the glomerular basement membrane. And finally there are subepithelial deposits. Subepithelial deposits, when we talk about, they are beneath the podocytes or visceral epithelial cells. So they will be located between the food processes of podocytes or visceral epithelial cells, and they will be lying above the glomerular basement membrane. So they will be in between the glomerular basement membrane and visceral epithelial cells or podocytes. So they will be lying above the glomerular basement membrane. So mesangial deposits, they are around the mesangial cells or in the interstitium of glomeruli. Subendothelial cells, subendothelial deposits, they will be beneath the glomerular basement membrane, and subepithelial deposits, they will be obviously above the glomerular basement membrane or outer to the glomerular basement membrane, because peripheral to that we have these visceral epithelial cells or podocytes. So these are the three different kinds of deposits that can be seen in glomeruli, and they will be coming repeatedly. Then second broad category of glomerular injury is cell mediated. As we have seen that antibodies can cause glomerular injury by different mechanisms, but antibodies usually initiate the glomerular injury, but these sensitized T cells, they propagate the injury by secreting different kinds of chemokines, and they recruit more and more of inflammatory cells, macrophages and other T lymphocytes and neutrophils, etc. And they are the ones which cause injury at the site of this inflammation. Then the third mechanism is secondary pathogenic mechanisms. Mediators of inflammation, as we have discussed previously in the chapter of inflammation, they can be either cells or they can be chemical mediators. So cells which propagate this inflammation, they or cause injury, they can be neutrophils, monocytes, T lymphocytes, NK cells, platelets, and also resident glomerular cells. They can also participate by secreting different chemical mediators and causing injury. Similarly, all these cells, these neutrophils, monocytes, etc., they will also cause injury by secreting their cytoplasmic contents, and also they can secrete some kind of chemokines which bring in more and more cells and propagating the injury. Then chemical mediators, they can be interleukin 1, TNF, various chemokines, and also complement system. It has a very important role to play in glomerular injury. So all these are different mechanism of glomerular injury. These are antibody mediated. Again, that is of further three types. Then there can be cell mediated glomerular injury. Then there are secondary pathogenic mechanisms where different types of other cells of inflammation and various chemical mediators, especially the complement system, they all come together to cause glomerular injury. So we just discussed about the pathogenesis of glomerular injury. All these different mechanisms, one or more of them may be involved in a different kind of glomerulonephritis. Now we will talk about histologic alterations in glomerular injury. Now glomeruli, no matter which kind of injury they undergo, they have very limited ways of expressing that they are, there is a kind of some kind of insult is going on in the glomeruli. So there are specific terms which will be coming on repeatedly, so I want you to be aware of what these terms mean. So we'll start with these common histologic alterations. Starting with first of the histologic alterations or morphological changes in glomerular injury, it is hypercellularity. So hypercellularity, simply there will be increase in cells. So what are the different cells which participate towards this increase in cells? Is mesangial cells. They can also be proliferation of endothelial cells, incoming leukocytes, and crescent formation. So this hypercellularity, it can be because of the resident population of glomeruli, and also they can be because of other inflammatory cells like leukocytes, which can lead towards increase in the number of cells of glomeruli and in turn leading to increase in the mass of glomeruli. Then there is a new term which is a crescent. So crescent is, it appears like a crescent moon, that is why they are called crescents. These crescents, these are accumulations of cells which are composed of proliferating parietal epithelial cells and leukocytes. As you would recall, we have Bowman space or urinary space, and lower to that we have visceral epithelial cells or podocytes, and parietal to that we have parietal epithelial cells. So what causes this crescent formation, what leads to the proliferation of these parietal epithelial cells is leakage of fibrin into Bowman space. So this leakage of fibrin into Bowman space, which can occur in a variety of glomerular diseases where glomerular basement membrane it gets ruptured. So this fibrin, its presence in urinary space, it irritates the parietal epithelial cells, and they don't know anything better to do but proliferate. So they start proliferating, and this proliferation appears as a crescent, and that is why they are called crescents. Secondly, basement membrane thickening. This basement membrane thickening is observed as thickening of capillary loops, and this basement membrane thickening is best appreciated on PAS stain. Now, what leads to glomerular basement membrane thickening? This can be either because of immune complex deposition. So, glomerular basement membrane itself has not thickened, but it appears thickened because of deposition of immune complex deposition, and they appear almost the same on light microscopy. Or there can be reactive changes in response to glomerular injury, and glomerular membrane actually undergoes thickening, but it appears thickened in both the cases, whether it has actually become thickened or there is deposition of immune complexes. Then third term is hyalinosis. Hyaline, it is composed of extracellular proteins which have leaked through damaged glomerular basement membrane, and it appears on light microscopy as homogeneous light eosinophilic substance on HND stain. Then other term is sclerosis. This appearance is due to extracellular collagen deposition, and this has bright homogeneous eosinophilic appearance on light microscopy on HND stains. So hyalinosis is slightly lightly colored homogeneous light eosinophilic appearance on HND, whereas sclerosis has bright eosinophilic appearance on HND. So these are the different histologic alterations that we can see in any type of glomerular injury. Coming on to clinical manifestations of glomerular injury. So glomerular injury can present with any of the various clinical syndromes that we had discussed in lecture 1, that is nephritic syndrome, nephrotic syndrome, acute renal failure, chronic renal failure, or isolated urinary abnormalities. So we have already covered them. Only thing is just a few additional points where some of the features they can help differentiating glomerular injury from any other cause of injury. So one of these is renal versus postrenal hematuria. As you might be aware that hematuria can occur in any pathology of urinary tract throughout its length. So when we need to establish whether it is of renal origin or postrenal origin, there are certain pointers which can be of help. One is red cell cast presence, and second are dysmorphic RBCs. So what are these red cell casts? Red cell casts are the RBCs which have originated in the glomeruli, and they have become trapped or lodged in the tubules, and they take on the shape of or the cast of the tubules. So they have this cylindrical appearance on sediment examination, and if we are finding red cell casts in the urinary sediment examination, then we can assume that the origin of these RBCs is of glomerular origin. Similarly, if the RBCs they have this dysmorphic shape instead of the usual biconcave form, then again we can assume that they are of renal origin. Then second is glomerular versus tubulointerstitial disease. These glomerular diseases, they present with hematuria and proteinuria of different degrees depending upon whether the patient is presenting with nephrotic syndrome or nephritic syndrome, and there will be hematuria again, red cell casts and dysmorphic RBCs. Now, tubular diseases, they have slightly different presentation as we had discussed in our lecture number 1, that the main function of tubules is to concentrate the urine and maintain the electrolyte balance. So, whenever there are tubular pathologies, there will be presence of electrolyte imbalance and there will be changes in specific gravity of urine. So, these are the differentiating points which can help us in pinpointing the site of injury. So let's start with now the classification of glomerular diseases. So as we had already discussed that the glomeruli, they can be either primarily involved or they can be a part of a systemic disease. So primary glomerular diseases, they can be minimal change disease, which you would recall that is the most common cause of nephrotic syndrome in children, and focal segmental glomerular sclerosis, most common cause of nephrotic syndrome in adults. Then membranous nephropathy, acute post-infectious glomerulonephritis, which presents with nephritic syndrome, then membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis and IgA nephropathy. Similarly, glomeruli can also be involved in a large number of systemic diseases. Important ones amongst these are lupus nephritis, diabetic nephropathy, glomerulonephritis secondary to multiple myeloma, then Goodpasture syndrome, microscopic polyangiitis, then and other vascular diseases. So these secondary glomerular diseases, these have been discussed or will be discussed whenever we discuss these main entities. So like secondary glomerular disease due to diabetes, it will be discussed when we discuss diabetes. So here we will be limiting ourselves only to the discussion of primary glomerular diseases. Hereditary nephritis we have already covered in our lecture number 1 of excretory system. So we will start with primary glomerular diseases. Starting with the first of these, which is acute post-infectious glomerulonephritis. It is also known by the name of acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis and acute proliferative glomerulonephritis. All these terms, they give you some insight about the etiopathogenesis of this disease. Acute post-infectious glomerulonephritis, that is this type of glomerulonephritis, it originates after some kind of infection. Then acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, again this type of glomerulonephritis is seen in patients with a history of streptococcal infection amongst other infections. In fact, it is one of the most common infection which leads to glomerulonephritis, although post-infectious is a more inclusive term. And then finally, acute proliferative glomerulonephritis, because there is increase in number of glomerular cells. So this cluster of diseases is characterized histologically by diffuse proliferation of glomerular cells along with influx of leukocytes. So there is presence of a hypercellular glomerulus where there will be proliferation of glomerular cells as well as there will be influx of leukocytes. Most common underlying infection is streptococcal, but other infections, they have also been associated, and that is why post-infectious glomerulonephritis is a more inclusive term, because it also sensitizes you towards the fact that it's not always, although mostly it is the case that it will be after a streptococcal infection, but it can be seen in other infections also. Then coming on to etiopathogenesis. It affects mainly small children about the age group of 6 to 10 years. Usually it develops 1 to 4 weeks following a streptococcal infection, which can be either of pharynx or of skin. So there will be a characteristic history of a skin infection or a upper respiratory tract infection, and that after about 1 to 4 weeks of this type of infection, the patient will come with renal complaints, and these renal complaints, as you would recall, will be of nephritic syndrome. All the symptoms of nephritic syndrome, they will be there. So these, in most of the cases, or about 90% of the cases, nephritogenous strains of beta hemolytic streptococci, they are implicated, and usually type 1, 4 and 12. So what happens is that antibodies against various streptococcal antigens, these are formed, and the immune complexes of antigen antibody, they are deposited in glomeruli. As we had discussed in antibody mediated mechanisms of glomerular injury, that at times these immune complexes, they can form in circulation and then lodge there. Similarly, the mechanism of acute post-infectious glomerulonephritis is also the same, that immune complexes of antigen antibodies, they are deposited in glomeruli. So what is the morphology? Before we start with the morphology of acute post-streptococcal or post-infectious glomerulonephritis, let's first discuss how we describe the microscopic features of any type of glomerulonephritis. So what we use is, first we talk about light microscopy, where we talk about the usual stain that we use, which is hematoxylin and eosin, and also we use certain stains which are used to highlight the glomerular basement membrane, like PAS and silvermethenamine. Then second step would be using immunofluorescence findings, where different types of antigens or antibodies, they can be highlighted. And finally there is electron microscopy, where again we can see again these immune complexes, glomerular basement membrane thickening, various alterations of podocytes, they all can be appreciated. So why we need all these three? Because as we will see in coming slides, that in some type of glomerular injury, the light microscopy, it can be completely normal, and at times this immunofluorescence also, this can be completely normal, so it may be missed on both of these investigations. So in those cases we will need electron microscopy. Also, in some type of glomerulonephritis, there will be overlapping in the features which we see on light microscopy, as we had discussed earlier also, that kidney has limited way of showing morphological changes. So light microscopy may not give you a conclusive answer, and for that we may need immunofluorescence findings and electron microscopy findings. So all these three, they go hand in hand, and they are required in almost all cases of glomerulonephritis. And finally we'll talk about gross features, if they are applicable, but usually we will not be discussing about gross features, because usually in acute type of glomerulonephritis, the renal or nephrectomies, it is not performed. So with this information, we start with the morphology of acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, starting with light microscopy. The classical picture is of enlarged hypercellular glomerulus. This hypercellularity, it is due to both diffuse infiltration by leukocytes, predominantly neutrophils and monocytes, and proliferation of endothelial and mesangial cells. So there is proliferation of both resident glomerular cells as well as the infiltrating inflammatory cells. Recent formation can be seen in severe cases. Tubules and interstitium, they can also show changes. In addition to glomeruli, tubules have presence of red cell cast, and interstitium shows edema and inflammation. On immunofluorescence, there is presence of granular deposits of IgG, IgM and C3 in the mesangium and along the glomerular basement membrane. On electron microscopy, there is presence of discrete amorphous electron dense deposits on the epithelial sides of the membrane, which are also called as humps. So clinical features are typically of a young child with history of infection of upper respiratory tract or skin 1 to 4 weeks prior to the onset of renal symptoms, which can be in the form of nephritic syndrome, and in addition to that there can be features of malaise and fever. Prognosis: 95% of the children, they recover with conservative therapy. Only a small minority of the children will go on to develop RPGL, where histologically crescents will be seen. A few others will also go on to develop chronic glomerulonephritis. Then one small subcategory is non-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. As we had discussed that the more inclusive term is post-infectious glomerulonephritis. So there are other infections of other bacteria, then viruses and parasites, which can also lead to a picture which is morphologically similar to post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. This photomicrograph is of microscopic changes of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. In the center, in diagram A, we can see a glomerulus which is enlarged in size, and we can see there is bilobed cells which are neutrophils. So the glomerulus is hypercellular, and it is hypercellular because of proliferation of glomerular cells as well as by infiltration by various inflammatory cells, predominantly neutrophils. Also on the left side, we can see at least three tubules which have this bright eosinophilic material in their lumina, which are red cell casts. On the right side, we have a picture of electron microscopy of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Here we can see these typical electron-dense subepithelial humps, which are depicted here by an arrow. This photomicrograph again shows the microscopic features of post-infectious or post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. On high power, we can see that the glomerulus is enlarged in size and is hypercellular because of it is almost full of cells, and this hypercellularity is because of these lightly stained nuclei which are resident glomerular cells, mesangial cells, endothelial cells, and we can also see these darkly stained cells which are these inflammatory cells, predominantly neutrophils and a few monocytes. This line diagram again shows post-infectious glomerulonephritis. The glomerulus, it is increased in size and is hypercellular, and we can see a lot of acute inflammatory cells which are contributing towards the hypercellularity of the glomerulus. Then coming on to second broad category, which is rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis or crescentic glomerulonephritis. This is a clinical syndrome which is associated with severe glomerular injury, and it does not denote a specific etiologic form of glomerulonephritis. It is basically a group of diseases which have the similar clinical presentation as well as microscopic features. So it is characterized by rapid and progressive loss of renal function, which is associated with oliguria and signs of nephritic syndrome. So the patients will have symptoms which will fit into acute renal failure also, and also in nephritic syndrome. And histologically, these patients, they have presence of crescents. Crescents, as we had discussed earlier, these are proliferations of parietal epithelial cells lining the Bowman's capsule and by infiltration of monocytes and macrophages. Classification and pathogenesis. The pathogenetic mechanism is of immune mediated injury, and this is further divided into three subtypes depending upon the type of immune mechanism involved. Not all cases of these entities will lead to development of RPG, and this is what I need to highlight here. Only a subset of patients with these various conditions, only they will go on to develop RPGN. So they, as this is seen in a multiple group of conditions, so many of them will run their normal course, but only a small subset of patients with these conditions, they will go on to develop RPGM and have features of acute renal failure and nephritic syndrome and histologically presence of crescents. Coming on to classification, as we had discussed that RPGN can be seen in a number of diseases. So broadly, these categories, they can be divided into three types. One is type 1, which is also anti-GBM antibody type. In this, we have conditions like Goodpasture syndrome and renal limited type of Goodpasture syndrome. Then we can have type 2 or immune complex mediated RPGN, where it can be idiopathic, or post-infectious glomerulonephritis, lupus nephritis, Henoch-Schönlein purpura, or IgA nephropathy and other causes. And then finally, there is type 3 or post-immune, which is ANCA associated, or it can be idiopathic and other connective tissue disorders and vasculitis like vaginous granulomatosis and microscopic polyangiitis. These all a subset of patients of any of these syndromes, they can go on to develop a severe form which is RPGN. Starting with first of these broad categories, which is anti-GBM antibody-induced disease. Here, linear deposits of IgG with or without C3 are seen on glomerular basement membrane on immunofluorescence. So there are presence of various antigens on glomerular basement membrane, and one of these antigens is good pasture antigen. So what is this good pasture antigen? This is a peptide within the non-collagenous or NC portion of alpha 3 chain of collagen type 4. So as we know, this type 4 collagen, it is a major constituent of glomerular basement membrane. Amongst it, there is presence of a non-collagenous portion of it of alpha 3 chain, and this is the antigen against which antibodies are formed in good pasture syndrome. Now, this good pasture syndrome, it can be of two types. Either it can be limited to the kidneys only, or it can be of a systemic type, where it is called as good pasture syndrome. In renal limited type, there will be destruction occurring only in the glomeruli, whereas in good pasture syndrome, both kidneys and lungs, they are involved. So what leads to the formation of these antibodies? It is unclear. Various etiological agents, they have been purported, um, maybe viruses or chemicals, but the most widely held belief is the presence of a genetic predisposition towards development of antibodies against this particular self-antigen. So treatment is of plasmapheresis, where the antibodies which are acting against self-antigens, they are filtered out. Then second category is immune complex deposition, where antigen antibody complexes or immune complexes, they deposit in glomeruli. So this type of RPGN can be complication of various types of immune complex glomerulonephritis, for example, post-streptococcal, lupus nephritis, and IgA nephropathy. On immunofluorescence, there will be presence of granular deposits with or without glomerular hypercellularity on light microscopy. Treatment is treatment of the underlying cause. Then third broad category is pauci-immune or type 3. As the name suggests, there will be paucity of immune complexes. So there will be lack of any glomerular basement membrane antibodies or immune complex deposition on immunofluorescence or electron microscopy. So this has been observed that most of these patients, they have circulating ANCA, and they can be a component of vasculitis or an isolated glomerular disease. So these are the three types of RPGN. Let's summarize them once again. So this can occur, this type of RPGN, this can occur either as a component of a well-defined disease, or at times it can be idiopathic where no underlying cause can be identified. These are characterized by clinically by presence of acute renal failure and nephritic syndrome, and on microscopy there is characteristic presence of crescents. On immunofluorescence, three distinct patterns can be identified. These are linear deposits, where the deposits along the length of glomerular basement membrane, they are seen, and if linear deposits are there, then it is called anti-GBM type. Or there can be presence of granular deposits. If granular deposits are there, then it becomes immune complex type, and if no deposits or scarce deposits, they are seen on electron microscopy or immunofluorescence, then it becomes pauci-immune type. So these are the three subtypes of RPGN, and then there can be an idiopathic type where no underlying cause can be identified. So again, this table shows the contrasting features between type 1, type 2 or type 3 RPGN. Clinical syndrome will be of nephritic syndrome with acute renal failure. Pathogenic type in anti-GBM or type 1 will be anti-GBM type, type 2 is immune complex, type 3 is pauci-immune. On immunofluorescence, anti-GBM will have linear deposits, Type 2 will have, or immune complex type will have granular deposits, and post-immune will have sparse or absent deposits. Then serological markers, serum C3 levels, they will be almost normal in all the three subtypes. In anti-GBM type, the anti-GBM antibody will be positive, ANCA will be positive in post-immune type, and underlying causes we have already discussed. Then coming on to morphology of RPGN, grossly the kidneys, they are enlarged, pale, with petechial hemorrhages on the cortical surface, and the characteristic appearance of RPGN is described as flea-bitten kidney because of these petechial hemorrhages on the surface of kidney. So on the right we have this gross picture of RPGN where we can see multiple pinpoint hemorrhages. They are there on the surface of kidney, giving it a flea-bitten appearance. Then light microscopy, as we have discussed earlier also, that the characteristic lesion of RPGN is the presence of crescents. Now these crescents, they can obliterate the movement space and compress the underlying glomerular duct. Here you can see that in the upper half of the glomerulus we can see the multiple layers of parietal epithelial cells. They are there and they are almost compressing the underlying glomerulus. Crescents, we had already discussed that these can be composed of parietal epithelial cells, inflammatory cells, and fibrin. Now, depending upon the underlying cause, the glomeruli, they can show areas of focal necrosis, endothelial proliferation, and mesangial proliferation. For example, in this case, that the pictures we have taken here, the underlying glomerulus, it shows lots of neutrophils and there is glomerular hypercellularity. So here RPGN is arising in context of post-infectious type glomerulonephritis or post-streptococcal type of glomerulonephritis. Then on immunofluorescence, depending upon the subtype of RPGN, the pattern can be either of granular type in immune complex type, linear in anti-GBM type, and absent in post-immune type. On electron microscopy, we will see deposits in immune complex type, and they can be rupture and wrinkling of glomerular basement membrane in all subtypes, and this is responsible for leakage of proteins, particularly fibrin, RBCs, and inflammatory cells, which incites a response from parietal epithelial cells leading to formation of crescents. Clinical course is variable. Features will be of underlying cause, and in addition, there will be features of acute renal failure and nephritic syndrome. And Goodpasture syndrome can also have, in addition to renal features, features of hemopsis. Now, other investigation that we need to do in addition to renal biopsy are ANCA to establish whether it is of post-immune origin, anti-GBM antibodies to establish whether it is of anti-GBM type, anti-nuclear antibodies, and ASO titers. They can also be done. ASO titers will be required to establish whether it is of post-streptococcal type of glomerulonephritis, which has now become complicated with RPGN. So these additional investigations we also need to do to establish the underlying cause and treat it. This photomicrograph of RPGN is stained with silver methenamine stain, and on the in the center we have this glomerulus, and almost to the right half of the glomerulus we can see these intertwining loops of glomerular capillaries, whereas on the left side there is no presence of this black colored capillary loops. So these glomerular basement membrane, they are highlighted by this black colored undulating membranes. So as you can see on the left side, it is not visible because there is presence of a crescent on the left side. Also on the left side we can see some pale colored cells which are parietal epithelial cells, and some dark blue colored cells which are inflammatory cells, and also there is presence of this bright eosinophilic material which is fibrin. And this crescent, as you can see, it is almost obliterating the Bowman space and it is compressing the underlying glomerulus, whereas on the right side of the glomerulus it is somewhat preserved. This diagram highlights the ultrastructure of portion of glomerular tubule in RPGN. At the top, we can see a crescent with parietal epithelial cells and these reddish chunks which are of fibrin. Underlying glomerulus, it shows proliferation of the endothelial cells, and we can see this red colored deposit between the mm, visceral epithelial cells and the glomerular basement membrane. Also, we can see on the right side that the glomerular basement membrane is focally disrupted. And the podocytes or visceral epithelial cells, they are also focally flattened. What I want to highlight here is that these granular deposits in they will be seen only in immune complex type of RPGN. They will not be seen in other subtypes. Although crescents, they will be universal in any kind of RPGN, and this disruption of glomerular basement membrane, this will also be seen in all the cases. But these immune complexes, they will be seen, or these granular deposits that we are seeing here in the subepithelial location, they will be seen in only immune complex subtype of RPGA. Starting with next entity, which is membranous nephropathy. This is one of the common causes of nephrotic syndrome in adults. It is characterized by, as the name suggests, it is membranous. So there will be diffuse thickening of glomerular capillary wall due to accumulation of electron dense immunoglobulin containing deposits along the subepithelial side of basement membrane. So etiologically, it can be primary or secondary. Primary cases account for almost 85% of the total cases, whereas secondary cases are responsible for remaining 15%. These secondary cases can be because of drugs, malignancies, SLE, or infections. Drugs can be penicillamine, captopril, gold, NSAIDs. Malignancies like carcinoma lung, colon, and malignant melanoma. 10 to 15% of lupus nephritis, they will go on to develop membranous type of nephropathy, and infections like chronic hepatitis B, C, syphilis, and malaria, they all can lead to membranous type of nephropathy. So these are the causes of membranous nephropathy. It can be primary or idiopathic, or it can be secondary, where all these causes we have just enumerated. Coming on to the mechanism of injury or pathogenesis, again, it is a type of immune complex mediated disease. So against what these antibodies they are created, this antigen, it can be of endogenous type or it can be of exogenous type. Exogenous antigen, example of it would be drugs or some kind of viruses that we have just enumerated, or at times it can be endogenous as in the case of SLE. Now, lesions, they resemble hemiannephritis that we had discussed in pathogenesis of glomerulonephritis, and which was demonstrated in the rats experimentally. However, the inciting antigen is not identified in humans. This we had also earlier discussed. So this appears to be an autoimmune disease which is linked to susceptibility genes with demonstration of autoantibodies to unidentified renal antigen. So mechanism of proteinuria, there is direct injury by membrane attack complex which activates glomerular epithelial and mesangial cells which release proteases and which in turn damage the capillary wall. So this is the mechanism of injury of membranous nephropathy. So just recapitulating the pathogenesis of membranous nephropathy, in 85% of the causes there will be no underlying cause identified, that is, it will be primary. In these cases, there is some unidentified antigen which is present in the glomeruli. Against them, antibodies they are forming, and along with complement, generation of membrane attack complexes there, and that leads to release of various kinds of enzymes which ultimately damage the capillary wall. In 15% of the cases, there can be other mechanisms or secondary causes where the antigen can be either of exogenous origin or endogenous origin, which leads to again generation of immune complexes and resulting in glomerular injury. So these are the two mechanisms of membranous nephropathy. Coming on to morphology of membranous nephropathy, grossly the kidneys they will be enlarged, pale and smooth on microscopy. Let's start with light microscopy. So glomeruli will be normal in early stages. Later on, they exhibit a diffuse thickening in glomerular capillary wall. Now, because of this diffuse thickening, the spikes they protrude from the glomerular basement membrane, and also there is deposition of various immune complexes on the surface of this glomerular basement membrane, which on in this diagram on the right they are represented in black color. These black dots, these are actually the immune complexes, and just beneath that we have glomerular basement membrane, which is depicted in this pinkish maroon color. So this glomerular basement membrane, it reacts to these immune complexes which are deposited on its surface. It starts in thickening in size in the form of spikes initially. These spikes protrude in between these immune complexes. Later on, these spikes they enlarge and they turn into domes, and these domes ultimately completely cover over these immune complexes, leading to formation of another layer of glomerular basement membrane on top of these immune complexes, and this is called as duplication of basement membrane. So actually it appears duplicated, but it is not duplicated, it's just thickened, and in between its layers there is presence of these immune complexes. And there is the important thing is that there is no increase in cellularity of glomeruli. So mainly the lesions they will be limited to glomerular basement membrane, where it will be thickened, and there will be presence of spikes which later on go on to become domes, and ultimately it appears as if it is reduplicated. This is a photomicrograph of a glomerulus in a case with membranous nephropathy. As you can see that the glomerular capillary loops they have become very prominent, and these are prominent because of thickened glomerular basement membrane. Otherwise, the cellularity of the glomerulus is not increased. Another case of membranous glomerulonephritis, as you can see these glomerulocapillary loops, they are really standing out because they are thickened, and the mesangial cells, their number is not that much increased, so that the glomerular cellularity it is normal. Only thing is that the glomerulocapillary loops they have become thickened. This photomicrograph is again of membranous glomerulonephritis, but here we have used silver methenamine stain, which is highlighting the glomerular basement membrane as at least on two places. These arrows they are pointing. We can see that the glomerular basement membrane, instead of a single linear line, it has become transformed into a chain-like structure. So the underlying line is of the original glomerular basement membrane. These empty spaces within the loops of this chain, these are immune complexes which have not become stained, and then this chain is actually of the spikes of glomerular basement membrane which have now completely uncovered these immune complexes. So this chain-like or duplication of basement membrane, it can be appreciated almost throughout the length of glomerular basement membrane in this particular diagram. This is a diagrammatic representation of membranous nephropathy of the various glomerular basement membrane changes that occur. On the left upper corner, we have a normal glomerulus where the green cells, they are visceral epithelial cells or podocytes. In its lower half, we can see these spikes, which are actually the foot processes of visceral epithelial cells or podocytes. The yellow colored cell is the endothelial cells of capillary, red colored cell is the mesangial cell, and the gray color lined is the glomerular basement membrane. In the right upper corner, we can see that these black colored deposits they have started appearing on top of the glomerular basement membrane, which are lying in between the visceral epithelial cells and glomerular basement membrane. So these are subepithelial deposits, and you can also see that the foot processes of these visceral epithelial cells they have also started becoming effaced. Then in the right lower corner, you can see that these black colored deposits, they have increased much more in number and size, so that they are almost completely covering the glomerular basement membrane. In the left lower corner, we can see that in between these black colored deposits, now the spikes of glomerular basement membrane, they have started going up and they are filling the gaps in between these immune complex deposits. So now these black areas, these are also alternated by these gray colored areas, which is, so gray is glomerular basement membrane, and ultimately these spikes, they will enlarge, they become dome shaped so that they cover some area of immune complexes, and ultimately they will join in the middle so as to form another layer which will be completely covering these immune complexes. So we have covered light microscopy of membranous glomerulonephritis, continuing with immunofluorescence, as we had discussed that this is immune mediated glomerulonephritis. So there will be presence of granular deposits of immune complexes containing IgG and C3. On electron microscopy, there will be presence of irregular, dense subepithelial deposits of immune complexes. Subepithelial meaning they will be lying in between the visceral epithelial cells and glomerular basement membrane, or they will be outer to the glomerular basement membrane. The visceral epithelial cells, they will also show effacement of food processes. Then the basement membrane material, it will be laid down in between these deposits in the form of spikes which protrude from glomerular basement membrane. Ultimately, they will convert into domes and completely cover over the deposits, leading to duplication of basement membrane. Clinical features, these patients, they present with nephrotic syndrome, and it is important to rule out any underlying causes or secondary causes of membranous nephropathy. Proteinuria is non-selective and it does not respond well to corticosteroids. A small number of these patients will progress to chronic glomerulonephritis and renal failure. Next entity is a very important entity. This is minimal change disease. As you would recall, this is the most common cause of nephrotic syndrome in children. So what is this minimal change disease? This is characterized by diffuse effacement of visceral epithelial cells, which are also called as podocytes. Their food processes, they become effaced, and this is seen only on electron microscopy, and normal appearance of glomeruli on light microscopy, and there will be absence of deposits on immunofluorescence or electron microscopy. So the only change that will be seen in these patients is the effacement of food processes of visceral epithelial cells on electron microscopy. The light microscopy appearance, it will be completely normal. There will be absence of deposits on immunofluorescence as well as electron microscopy. So that is why it is called minimal change disease. Etiopathogenesis. Though no immune complex deposition on immunofluorescence, but still the mechanism of injury in these patients is considered to be immune mediated, and there are various reasons or observations that have been made which point towards an immune mechanism in these patients. One is that the patients with these upper respiratory tract infections and immunization, they have association with minimal change disease. Then it is also found to be associated with other atopic disorders like eczema. There is increased incidence of minimal change disease in HLA haplotypes which are associated with atopy. And finally, the patients with minimal change disease, they have dramatic response to steroid therapy. So all these observations point towards an immune mediated mechanism in these patients. So current leading hypothesis is the presence of some immune dysfunction which leads to generation of cytokines that damage or that are directed mainly against the visceral epithelial cells, leading to effacement of their food processes, and their effacement leads to proteinuria in these patients. There is also a type of hereditary type of minimal change disease which is called as Finnish type. Here, mutation in nephrin gene is there which leads to congenital nephrotic syndrome in these patients. This is a diagrammatic representation of proteins of glomerular slit diaphragm. On both sides we have these podocyte foot processes, and in between we can see the nephrin molecules, which are represented here by a yellow colored these rods, and below that we have basement membrane and endothelial cells. So in patients with hereditary type of minimal change disease or of Finnish type, there is a defect in these nephrin molecules which compromise the integrity of glomerular slit diaphragm. Coming on to morphology of minimal change disease, on light microscopy, glomeruli will be absolutely normal. Cells of proximal convoluted tubules, they are lipid laden, and these reflect lipid resorption. As we had discussed that in nephrotic syndrome, there is lipiduria. So because of lipid resorption, the PCT cells, they become lipid laden, and that is why earlier it was called as lipoid nephrosis also. On immunofluorescence, there will be no deposits, and on electron microscopy, again there will be no deposits they will be seen. The only change or the principal lesion that will be seen in the patients with minimal change disease is the presence of uniform and diffused effacement of foot processes of podocytes or visceral epithelial cells. So what happens to them is that they become flattened out, they show vacuoles, there is swelling and hyperplasia of villi, which is incorrectly called as fusion of foot process, and there is simplification of podocyte foot process architecture. So all the changes that are there, they are limited to the foot processes of visceral epithelial cells. Now, you would recall that food processes of podocytes, they are also effaced in membranous glomerulonephritis and diabetic nephropathy. So therefore, for diagnosis of minimal change disease, all the three, that is light microscopy, immunofluorescence, and electron microscopy, they are required. So the patient has to be, or the glomerular structure, it has to be completely normal on light microscopy. On immunofluorescence, it should show no deposits. On electron microscopy, it should show no deposits, and it should show effacement of food processes. Only then the patient will qualify for minimal change disease. So that is why all these three, light microscopy, immunofluorescence, and electron microscopy, they are required in any case with glomerulonephritis. This is just another example. So, food process effacement is reversible after corticosteroid therapy. So, this we had discussed earlier also, that these patients, they show very good response to steroids. Clinical features, this is the most common cause of nephrotic syndrome in children in 2 to 6 years of age. Proteinuria is usually of highly selective type. Highly selective type of proteinuria is the type of proteinuria where only low molecular weight proteins, they are excreted in urine, for example albumin. Then prognosis is excellent in these patients, and there is dramatic response to steroids. This is a diagrammatic representation of the effacement of food processes in minimal change disease. On the left side, we have a normal glomerular filtration slit diaphragm for comparison. We can see that these podocyte food processes, these are standing out as kind of humps on the surface of glomerular basement membrane, whereas on the right of this diagram, they have become flattened out or effaced and have ultimately become detached, and this compromises the integrity of glomerular filtration slit diaphragm, leading to the leakage of proteins and ultimately resulting in nephrotic syndrome in these patients. So in the left upper corner of this slide, we have the microscopic appearance of minimal change disease. As you can see, the glomerulus is absolutely normal, and the main diagram, which is occupying the most of this slide, is of electron microscopy picture of minimal change disease. So we have in the upper half of this diagram normal uh, podocytes along with glomerular basement membrane for comparison, and in the lower half we have the picture from a patient with minimal change disease. So in the upper half, you can see that there is this line-like structure, and on top of that, these finger-like or villi-like structures they are there, which are pointed out by a yellow-colored arrow here. So these villi-like structures or papillae, these are actually the food processes of visceral epithelial cells or podocytes. When we see or compare it with the lower diagram, we can see that these papillae, they have become, or the food processes, they have become completely flattened and effaced in a case with minimal change disease. So this is the only abnormality that we will see in patients with minimal change disease. We had also earlier discussed that it needs to be compared with immunofluorescence as well as light microscopy. They should be completely normal, and there should be no deposits on electron microscopy as well as on immunofluorescence, so that the diagnosis of minimal change disease is made, and other causes with food process effacement, they can be ruled out.